Over the course of its 20-year history, the South Carolina Campaign to Prevent Teen Pregnancy has built a strong brand in the state of South Carolina and throughout the country as one of the leading organizations in the field of teen pregnancy prevention. Through its Research and Evaluation Department, the organization stays abreast of the latest research and data, regularly disseminates this information to local organizations, and conducts research in critical areas of pregnancy prevention. As part of this dissemination process, the Research and Evaluation Department works closely with the Communications Department to format findings into easily understandable fact sheets and reports for the general public. Listen as Sarah Lamberson, Communications Specialist for the organization, describes this process.
When we need to get a publication developed here at the South Carolina Campaign, we usually talk to community members or right here in our capacity building department and find gaps in information that we might not have a fact sheet on or a publication on yet. And so when that happens, we'll have a kickoff meeting. We'll go over budget, content, audience, all those sorts of things, and really nail down what information is going to be in these publications. And then usually the marketing department will draft out the information. There'll be a lot of back and forth with the revision process between usually us, the research department, and the capacity building department. And then before we do a final print, we get approval from anyone that we need in the organization that is an expert in this particular subject. And then we figure out how to disseminate, usually through the website or giving out at conferences or different events.
With this process in mind, let's take a look at the development of an HIV, STI, and adolescence fact sheet that went awry. After reviewing this, I think you will agree that the South Carolina Campaign needs to ensure that in addition to their in-house experts, they also need to have final review by outside experts as needed before they go to print.
We worked really closely with the Department of Health and Environmental Control to develop an HIV STD fact sheet, and we were really just updating an existing fact sheet. And at some point, we received the data from the department. They worked very closely with us to update the fact sheet and understand the data. Once we printed the fact sheet, the Department of Health and Environmental Control reviewed it, and it came to our attention that we had used the terminology cases when it came to the ranking for chlamydia, gonorrhea, and HIV/AIDS in South Carolina. The department actually uses the terminology case rates, which we were not familiar with. And so because of that miscommunication, we had to go back, redo the fact sheet, and then reprint the fact sheet with the correct terminology.
To summarize the situation, the original data was collected by the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control. The information was handed over to the South Carolina Campaign's Research and Evaluation Department so that they could extract the most relevant pieces for South Carolina adolescents into a concise fact sheet. Once it was determined what data would be used, the information was then turned over to the South Carolina Campaign's Communications Department, who designed and formatted the final piece. As Sarah mentioned, DHEC didn't have another look at the publication until it was printed. This is when they noticed the mistake. If we analyze this situation through the lens of Jürgen Habermas's theory of communicative action, we will see where the room for error came into play and what the South Carolina Campaign can do in the future to keep this from happening again. Based on his theory, 4 validity claims must be fulfilled in order to achieve understanding: intelligibility, truth, truthfulness, and legitimacy. First, let's tackle intelligibility, which Roland Picard in the textbook Public Relations and Social Theory tells us is being able to use the proper grammatical rules. So, what did the South Carolina Campaign intend the message to mean? What the organization set out to report was the rate of incidence of several sexually transmitted diseases. But what was printed on the publication was not the rate, but instead the number of incidents, or cases. These two statements, which seem very similar, actually report two totally different things. It was the word choice that made this statement false. Next, let's discuss truth. What is true is that South Carolina has very high rates of gonorrhea, chlamydia, syphilis, and AIDS. What wasn't necessarily true was that our cases are high. Rates are based on population, and when you look at South Carolina's population, our rate is high. But if you simply compare cases in South Carolina to other larger states like Texas, California, and New York, our numbers would not be as high. Third, we look through the lens of truthfulness, which relates to being honest and not misleading the audience. Listen to Shannon Flynn, Director of Research and Evaluation for the South Carolina campaign, as she describes why getting this information right was so critical to the organization's reputation.
Over the years, the campaign had put out a series of publications that are really the cornerstone of what a lot of organizations use to advocate for their work, for legislators to make policy decisions, for really anyone in the community or providers to really understand issues. So that might be teen pregnancy prevention, it might be STIs and HIV. And so because we had built up such a strong track record over the years, we didn't want to do anything that could possibly undermine that trust. We want to be the people that someone calls when they have a question. And we don't want to have a situation where someone relies on our data and our interpretation of what the state of sexual health is and find out that they're not 100% saying something correctly. So even though it was a really very minor mistake, that probably one would have to be a very knowledgeable person in the field of HIV before they would even understand that there was something not 100% correct. We thought it was really important enough to scrap the entire first fact sheet and create a new one because we didn't want there to ever be the slightest question of whether or not the campaign is putting out data and information that's 100% reliable, 100% accurate, and always can be trusted.
Finally, we check the legitimacy of the message, which is ultimately where DHEC stepped in and said, "This isn't right." From what we have learned from the other three factors, we know that the message was not legitimate as written and printed the first time. It was imperative that the organization get the message right, which is why the entire fact sheet was reprinted after the information was updated. It was vital to the organization's reputation for the message to be legitimate. What steps could the South Carolina campaign take in the future to keep from experiencing this scenario again? My recommendation to the CEO, the Research and Evaluation Department, and the Communications Department would be to revise the publications process within the organization. To date, the process does not include an outside editor of publications when an in-house expert is not apparent. But had the Department of Health and Environmental Control been involved in the process sooner, the mistake would have been caught, and the organization would have saved the $1,200 printing cost and also the time that was spent by the staff members who had to revise and reprint the document.